Vietnam, 1968. A Marine platoon was about to get annihilated till a World War II relic saved them in the most unexpected way. The ambush. Let's move back to 1968, when the DMZ crisis occurred. Near the demilitarized zone, the Marine platoon found itself ambushed, with all the escape routes cut off. The chances were literally paper-thin to survive. They called for air support, and none of them was available. They called for ground artillery, but only silence set in. Desperation was everywhere as the soldiers wanted to save their lives. Then came a static, a voice that came from the radio. It was calm, authoritative, and almost like an angel for the soldiers of that time. The Marine looked out on the sea but saw nothing, only an empty horizon. After twisting their eyes about 25 miles away, they saw the most powerful monster still in the world, which was a relic from World War II that had just awoken to answer their call most unexpectedly. Let's take a step backward to the late 1960s. Warfare had already completely transformed. This was the age of supersonic jets and air battles, where guided missiles and helicopter air cavalry were everywhere. Modern technology dominated the battlefield, but in Vietnam, the United States was paying a heavy price for that modernization. The bombing campaign over North Vietnam was encountering a sophisticated air defense system.
Okay, would you roll in
The loss rate for aircraft and pilots was climbing to an alarming level, and each downed plane represented millions of dollars in loss. But highly trained pilots were also getting killed, who took years to replace. Many jets were down, many helicopters were getting destroyed. But back at the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara wanted a solution. He wanted a powerful, reliable, all-weather fire support platform that didn't risk pilots' lives with every mission. His answer was quite controversial at that time because he looked back on the past. Deep in the Naval Reserve Fleet, there was a giant sleeping. It was the USS New Jersey, a battleship that was launched for the first time in 1942 and set in mothballs. Many in the modern Navy laughed at the idea of reactivating it because it was almost like a relic from the past that they hadn't used for over 2 or 3 decades. It was like bringing a dinosaur to the modern battlefield and then expecting that dinosaur to dominate everyone, and surprisingly, if we were actually in the Navy back in those days, we would panic even more. Critics also argued that it was way too big, too obsolete, and far too expensive to operate in the jet era. But the New Jersey possessed something that no modern warship could match, which was a belt of steel armor that was nearly 20 inches thick and massive 16 inches guns that would penetrate even the strongest defense. McNamara was betting on raw and overwhelming power. After a huge modernization process, in April 1968, the new USS New Jersey was recommissioned, and it became the only active battleship in the entire world, which was a living contradiction to war domination. It was a World War II gladiator that was armed with huge guns, and it was heading into the modern guerrilla war. It was the most expensive experiment in naval history that was about to redefine the concept of fire support.
maybe my next dry docking.
Before we reveal how exactly the ship saved the lives of many pinned-down US soldiers, subscribe to the channel because it's about to get interesting. The freight train. Then, in September 1968, the USS New Jersey arrived on the gun line off the coast of Vietnam. The mission was to provide the most powerful floating fortress in the world. The power originated from the 16-inch Mark VII guns that were arranged in 3 turrets. Each of the turrets weighed more than a modern destroyer and was protected by nearly 20 inches of armor plating, which was thick. These massive guns could pierce shells that were weighing 2,700 pounds, which is no joke. To put that in perspective, the New Jersey was capable of hurling an object which is roughly the same weight as a Volkswagen Beetle, and it could hurl those shells a distance of 25 miles with devastating accuracy, which is what made it so deadly. At the peak of their trajectory, the shells flew more than 3 times the height of Mount Everest, reaching supersonic speed as they went down towards their target. The destructive power was apocalyptic here. A single shell explosive could go down 50 deep and clear an area the size of a football field. It could even turn the dense jungle into a highly vulnerable landing zone, instantly creating a clearing that did not exist seconds before. This was due to its devastating effects. It was sleeping for so long, but now it was back. Numbers cannot even truly describe the power of New Jersey. It had to be experienced with all the senses. When it was fired at night, the muzzle flashed in darkness into day instantly, which was visible for miles. The shock wave traveled across the ocean and was powerful enough to suck air out of your lungs if you stood too close to him. The most haunting aspect was for soldiers on the ground who were hearing the sounds of shells passing overhead, because they moved faster than sound, so the shells arrived before anyone could even notice, which was truly an unsettling experience. The shells also created a ferocious roar that literally ripped the air apart. Veterans even described it as a freight train roaring right next to your head, or a fully loaded dump truck cutting through the atmosphere at impossible speed. Not only was this defying the physics, but the destruction was equally impressive. In other words, it was terrifying both for the physical and for the psychological toll on soldiers on both sides that they would never ever forget. Here's one aspect that almost no one talks about. Mark 8 computer. Raw power of an even bigger machine like New Jersey is quite useless without any accuracy. But the question is, how could this ship fire so precisely from such an extreme distance and often hit the target that the crews couldn't even see? The answer is deep inside the ship, in a compartment called the main battery plot. This is the brain of this ship, and remarkably, it wasn't even digital. At the center of the room, there was the Mark 7 Rangekeeper, which was a multi-ton analog computer that contained thousands of cams and differentials. This massive machine constantly solved complex ballistic equations in real time, accounting for dozens of variables simultaneously. The computer factored in the ship's own speed and course, wind speed at multiple altitudes, air density, and even barometric pressure, along with the temperature of the gun propellant. At extreme ranges, the calculations became even more complex, and they had to account for the curvature of the Earth itself and a lot of other effects, like the rotational effects of the planet beneath the shell's flight path. Without these adjustments, a shell could miss the target by hundreds of yards despite perfect aiming.
The bearing is their speed, our speed, wind, also, depending on where we are, northern hemisphere.
The Mark 7 Rangekeeper kept these calculations mechanical, with spinning gears and rotating drums, achieving perfect accuracy that rivaled even modern-day digital systems. This process depended critically on forward observers on the battlefield, and brave individuals would identify targets and then send coordinates back to the ship. One day, a fire mission came in from over 20 miles away. The target was a single structure on the hilltop that the intelligence indicated was being used by the Vietnamese command as the Vietnamese command post. New Jersey fired the first round to calibrate, and just 90 seconds later, it completed the arc. The spotter radioed back with the correction. He said that enemy forces just entered the structure, 50 yards at 100 yards. The technicians in the main battery plot quickly edited new data, and the massive turret shifted to a fraction of a degree, according to the soldier. That tiny moment translated to a huge adjustment at 20 miles distance. Then it fired again. Another 90 seconds passed, and the enemy forces came back on the line, panicking. The observer also came back on the line, with his voice filled with complete amazement. He said that the hilltop is gone. The structure, the enemy forces, and a portion of the terrain itself have simply been destroyed. This was New Jersey's ability, which was reshaping the battlefield on demand from even 20 miles away. In other words, you can say that it was the peak of mechanical engineering at that time, the Black Dragon. But if you thought that was it for New Jersey's abilities, you'd be wrong. New Jersey had different faces depending on which side you were on. For the American and Allied soldiers on the ground, it was a guardian angel when the unit was pinned down. When a unit was captured, outnumbered, and facing destruction, the voice of New Jersey was a literal salvation, the sound of salvation itself. They were sent to their position within minutes and heard the sounds. It would be an ear-shattering roar of fright with the train overhead. The ground beneath them would shake violently, as if an earthquake were coming. The enemy's position would be transformed into a living hell, which would be a landscape of nothingness. Their attack would also cease instantly, and all the survivors would flee away from the soldiers, and they would be under fire. The Big J was the answer to their prayers. It was the voice of God delivering salvation through heavy firepower. The psychological relief was huge here, knowing that somewhere over the horizon, there were 9 massive guns that were turning to their call. But for the enemy, the New Jersey represented hell or the embodiment of inescapable destruction.
2, 1, fire!
North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces called it the Black Dragon, which was a mythical creature of unstoppable power. Whenever they would hear the shriek of the shell and the terrifying explosive force, they would panic. Survivors reported that the sound alone, which the freight train had induced panic amongst them. The ground-shaking explosion that followed created a crater deep enough to swallow buildings, and there was nowhere to hide to feel safe. The mere presence of New Jersey offshore severely degraded enemy morale in the entire region. Psychological power was deliberately exploited. there was one incident that involved leaflets dropping after a barrage that read, "You have just been shelled by the world's most powerful battleship. If you do not surrender in 10 minutes, you will receive another volley." Many enemy soldiers reportedly even surrendered, and the threat of total annihilation had broken their will to fight more effectively than any ground soldiers could ever have. The end. New Jersey had its short but incredibly intense tour in Vietnam, which happened between September 1968 and April 1969. It operated almost non-stop, and in just 7 months, it fired huge amounts of destruction, which is 5,688 16-inch shells, and nearly 15,000 5-inch shells from the secondary battery. But this display also came at a huge price. The cost of operating New Jersey was huge. The ship required over 1,500 sailors, and it consumed fuel at a huge rate. Tour maintenance was also constantly expensive, and each 16-inch shell cost thousands of dollars. In the end, just 15 months after recommissioning, the USS New Jersey was decommissioned for the second time. The thunder over the South China Sea also fell silent. Do you think the US will ever use the New Jersey battleship again? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon for more.